the Dan Bilzerians, the Andrew Tates.
Andrew Tate's of the world, there is a kernel of truth. But actually, the principal message of what he's saying is completely wrong.
But I can't go into my 30s having not done anything substantial with my life and career because there are people that are relying on me to do so.
Women, even those who would call themselves liberal or progressive, do actually want to be married to someone who can provide for them.
Welcome to the show. Thank you for taking part in this immersive listening experience. A meaningful existence is a moving target that, no matter how close, will always be out of reach. We hope this message finds you with an outstretched hand. As we attempt to uncover complex truths, remember, life's toughest questions can be answered if we all just focus on one thing: being good people.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Good People, episode 53. Today, I was joined by Chris Bullivant. The topic of today's episode is marriage. We talked about the contemporary viewpoints emerging around marriage, how some men and women think getting married is a bad deal, how the happiest people on earth are married with children, and much more. If you guys are watching on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on our notifications so you don't miss our weekly uploads. Enjoy the show. Well, Chris, welcome to the show. Tell me what the current contemporary viewpoint on marriage is.
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing a class divide in marriage which didn't exist in the 1970s, where we're seeing people who earn over $111,000 a year. They're getting married. The marriage rate there for people who are in working age but who graduated sort of 25 to 54, I think, is at 77%. So it's a pretty substantial amount of people there who are getting married. Whereas if you're earning below $50,000, you're seeing more like 22% of people in that age group being married. So I think actually one of the scariest contemporary views of marriage that we're seeing emerge is that marriage is unattainable for a huge part of the population. Mm-hmm. So I think that was actually one of the views that's emerging.
Has that been different from the past? Maybe tell me about how has that shifted for maybe a more traditional view?
Yeah, so that shift where actually if you're rich, you can get married, and if you're poor, you basically can't get married, it did not exist 45 years ago. Marriage rates were pretty standard and pretty high across the board. So something is happening whereby people who are on lower income or less skilled still want to marry. Aspiration rates to stay married are high across the board and across ethnicities and different groups. But in terms of those who are able to achieve it, it is really, it's different. And so there's a lot of research that's been done on why that's the case and what is happening. But a lot of what we are looking at is what is stopping people from being able to marry. And one of the things that we're seeing is the elite views, what elite messages that come out of Hollywood, that come out of opinion writers in New York, or that come out of legislation in DC. We're finding that a lot of those things are suggesting that any form of family is okay. And all that's doing is leaving those people who want to marry but aren't getting into sort of stable married families that they want to, are just left marooned without really much help for figuring out what to do.
So meaning the people who are poor essentially have the same sort of desire to have a family, maybe have a partner, have children, but there seems to now be this obstacle that they see of, well, if I do this legally and we make this a marriage, there's more of a financial burden to overcome. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. There are things like that, financial penalties, what we call marriage penalties, where if you're, you might lose out on your Medicaid if you get married, or other sort of benefits that get passported in on the basis of your income, that once you pull two incomes together, you then kind of disqualified. And so, yeah, you do see people who live apart together who are essentially living as married, but they're deciding not to tie the knot because of those sorts of issues. But I think the other issue that's perhaps, there's a couple of other issues. One, there is a huge growth in disability claimants, and men who are not going into the labor market, who aren't finding jobs. In fact, there's been a quite substantial growth of people who are just long-term disengaged from work, and that seems to have had quite an impact too on the level on the talent that's out there for women to be able to marry. There's the providers aren't necessarily there. But I think one of the sort of slightly controversial things that people don't really like to talk about is the fact that there are also almost I think 1 in 3 children are raised in lone parent families, and then they're also raised in neighborhoods where marriage doesn't exist, or like marriage deserts. And the point of that is that relationships and how you do them is learned in the context of relationships. You don't really learn relationships from a textbook, from a TikTok video. I mean, heaven forbid. You see it, and you see that, and it's impressed on you from when you're tiny, when your brain is forming, through your childhood and adolescence. And seeing how your family works is basically where you learn how to do family. And so actually, if you're growing up in a situation where there's a lot of churn in relationships, there's a whole lot of chaos, it's actually harder to figure out how to do the sort of emotional legwork, hard work of being able to figure out how to do relationship. So I think that what we're seeing there is possibly a trend whereby people are finding themselves increasingly without the sort of role models or relationships that they aspire to, and they're not quite sure how it works. And then with that, see, it's just about then like emotional temperament and just boundaries and the ability to sort of like live in a healthy relationship. If all you've seen is a sort of abuse or churn or chaos, then it's it's definitely like tricky to figure out how to do it well. Whereas those who are in that wealthy bracket, they are seeing stable married families for the most part, and so they're learning how to do it.
Are you familiar with Mary Harrington's work? I believe that's her
name.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've read some of her stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I was just going to say, she has this idea that there's a direct line between, and this might sound dramatic, but from holding the door for women or others and beating your wife, pretty much from a masculine standpoint. Like this is the same thing, right? If we don't train essentially this idea that respecting boundaries, being nice and courteous, then we will end up with a society many years from now as an unintended consequence, which mistreats people in the form of physical and verbal and other forms of abuse. Is it kind of in that same line, right? We have to sort of, when you have two parents to see loving each other and supporting each other, then you are more likely to follow through with those same patterns.
Yeah, I think definitely that's the sort of thing that we're talking about. And I'm sure that what Mary has written there is a sort of tip of the iceberg type symptom. I don't know if Rob Henderson came out with his memoir, Troubled, of his life in foster care. And I think just like Brad Wilcox's book, Get Married, Rob Henderson's book, Troubled, is unputdownable and it's a gripping memoir. And I think not only is his life and his childhood chaotic as he's moved from foster home to foster home and sort of seemingly abandoned by the various parent figures in his life, but he describes this entire community of friends who are experiencing that. So his friends at high school, that really the first time that he sees a majority of people who've grown up with stable married family is when he joins the military and he encounters the middle class for the first time. It's a fascinating book and worth a read, but I think it describes a lot of the dynamics that we're sort of talking about the sort of what Brad in his book Get Married calls the norms and networks that people exist in. So if you're, if you are in a neighborhood where the majority of people are married and there's other sort of pro-social behavior, like they're going to church or they're volunteering at a nonprofit or they're helping out at the local public school, those sorts of things build rich networks of relationship that all add to helping the sort of stable family unit. Whereas in those other neighborhoods where that's not happening and there's more crime, more antisocial behavior, there's sort of multiple partners in a situation, and that's all you're seeing, is really difficult to then go against the grain in that sort of a situation. So yeah, I think yeah, it's that sort of a thing.
I see. So it's more so that the income is more representative of the place you live in the community that you're within, and maybe less so to do with, the types of people getting into marriage thinking that it's more of like a financial burden or a bad deal.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the stuff I'm talking about, I think there's an economist at Harvard called Raj Chetty that Brad references in his book, Get Married. And he says that, he says that one of the biggest indicators for escaping poverty is the rate of people who are married in a neighborhood. So that if you are, the increasingly disintegration of the family unit actually gets in the way of your being able to move onwards and upwards. Now, then you've mentioned some new sort of like cultural dynamics that are taking place, this sort of messaging that is out there about what sort of marriage being a waste of time and sort of like being a huge financial risk. Is that the sort of thing that you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm actually very curious about that. Is why are men saying marriage is a bad deal?
Yeah, so because this is definitely like something that is new to me and that was in Brad's book. I wonder if you might be able to expand on that a little bit, even just for me, because it might be something that you and your viewers are like really familiar with. But I wonder if you could give me a refresh on what it is that you're particularly like interested by.
There's just a notion. So I should preface this by saying I'm engaged. I'm getting married in October this year.
Congrats.
Thank you. I'm 23. I feel like my peers, my age, I am at an accelerated rate in terms of my willingness to do this. And I'm very much going into it with this idea that perhaps I'm giving up some, I use the term freedom, but what I'm gaining is a lifetime of emotional connection, a supportive network and partner or familial thing that I can rely heavily on when I have career and other athletic goals that I'm trying to pursue. There's something that sort of grounds me. And I just feel like that is not common for my generation. It's almost the inverse of that. Why would I get married when I can stay single, meet lots of women, particularly from the masculine side, the male side of things? I hear this a lot. I actually would say I'm probably more unfamiliar with maybe female thinking. Perhaps there's a different perspective. But again, speaking from the male perspective, why would I tie myself down to one partner when I can, have lots of sex, when I can go anywhere that I want without telling anybody. I can focus more heavily on my career without having to support somebody else financially. And just from an outside perspective, that the people who really lean into that life, like the Dan Bilzerians, the Andrew Tates, that's a very small percentage of people that sort of get to live this high level of luxury lifestyle with millions of dollars. And, whether that's appealing or not, I don't know. But my perspective is that there's a very large chunk of people that this ends up just becoming an aspiration. And then it turns out that they aren't really living their life for anything meaningful. And that will be problematic both now and I think even more so in the future.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Joel. I really appreciate it. I think, yeah, Andrew Tate, I mean, is an interesting character, obviously, with his messaging around there being no, he says, I think that there's no value to a man in Western society getting married. It's like a death sentence. It's a sort of financial suicide. There is, there's an elements of reality in what he's describing. The divorce rate in the United States is significantly down from the divorce revolution in the 70s and 80s. So that there was a time when 1 in 2 marriages would fall apart. That's now a stat of the past, and most marriages, the majority of marriages, sort of go the distance. That said, though, there are most divorces are initiated by women. 69% of divorces in the United States are initiated by the female spouse. And and there will be reasons for that. There are ways, statistically speaking, to safeguard against that. And I think what's really important to say from the outset is that what we do here at the Institute for Family Studies and Brad's book is we do social science, it's sociology. And so it's not in that, and we deal with stats, and we look at trends, and we look at what trends are doing over decades. Everyone has their own unique personal story, and the application of these stats can sometimes appear a bit blunt or not particularly pastoral. I mean, if you were going to a church or whatever, and your pastor started to speak to you in these sorts of terms, you would be pretty triggered, I think, because it's pretty blunt when we're talking about stats. So I just say that as a sort of like blanket caveat. So I think Andrew Tate's of the world, there is a kernel of truth. I mean, obviously, divorce is painful and divorce is financially costly. But actually, the principal message of what he's saying is completely wrong and completely against what the data shows. And what we see for the hundreds of millions, the 330 million Americans that are here, what we see among the marriage trends in the American population is that the happiest people in America are those who are married. And by happy, we mean they have a sense of meaning and they have a sense of satisfaction about life. And we also see that those who are the most economically secure are also married. So older men who are going into retirement have colossal amounts more assets than their unmarried or never married peers. Married women with children are the most content and happiest in the United States. And then on sexual frequency, in Get Married, Brad Wilcox describes surveys that say that married couples who go to church have sex once a week, and statistically speaking, and then there are those then who are those who are married report higher satisfaction in their sex lives, and then those who are married report the same frequency of sex as those who are cohabiting, once you factor in the length of the duration of the relationship. So I think every single aspect of what the Andrew Tates of the world say is completely wrong. And there's someone called Pearl, someone or other, who on the female side similarly says marriage is a death sentence for women, and the stats again just prove the opposite. So yeah, I think some of what's interesting there, and there's on one side, people your age, and it's great that you're bucking the trend, are getting all of those sorts of like negative messages, but actually the context in which people are able to find a partner are sort of shrinking too. In some of the work that I was doing for the Social Capital campaign last year, we were looking at research that looks at the sort of wider context of relationships. And what we are seeing in America is some pretty disturbing features whereby people who attend church is down. I didn't say that from a point of view of lamenting sort of religiosity, but where people can go to meet other people, is down. Neighborly interactions are significantly down from the 60s and 70s. So the number of neighbors who would report either doing something social with a neighbor in a month or doing something to help a neighbor, like mow their lawn, all of that is like down. The venues in which people are able to make friends is down, clubs, societies, that sort of thing. So that actually increasingly people are only meeting new people in work. So actually, one of the recommendations that Brad makes, and he's a professor here at the University of Virginia here in Charlottesville, is that parents, well-meaning parents, will often also say to their kids who are at college, "No, don't rush into marriage. Maybe wait till you've graduated and matured a little bit." But actually, increasingly, people are finding it harder to meet other people, in an organic, natural way. So actually, if you find someone at university that you're compatible with and you like, it may actually be worth, taking the plunge because, it may be a little bit harder further down the line to find someone. But also, I mean, yeah, the idea of the argument for marrying young, as you were suggesting, is you are setting out marriage. You have a marriage partner who is with you for life. Marriage isn't a crowning achievement at the end of sort of like a couple of decades of career. And then, yeah, for having children, I've got to say, as someone who's had a kid in their 40s, I would totally recommend having a child in your 20s when you've got tons more energy for it. So, yeah, I think there's some real value for that.
I think that's very fascinating. The idea that we've essentially just like shrunk the pool of human interaction. Like, I guess as the world becomes a little bit more digitally dependent, things, there's a lady at UVA, I can't remember her name, something Pugh. She's in the Department of Sociology. She's writing a book that comes out later this year called The Last Human Job. Are you familiar?
No, it sounds like a good book.
Okay, you should check it out. She's at UVA. I can't remember her name, but she basically has this idea, and she talks about it in the book, of connective labor, and that jobs like being a clerk at a grocery store are way more valuable positions than we are giving them credit for, and we're just replacing them with automated experiences. And that is going to, the unintended consequences that it's going to very negatively impact our mental health because of the simple capacity of interacting with somebody else, looking them in the eye, asking them how their day was, is so impactful and necessary to be happy, really, that taking it away is going to cause problems. And I know we're talking more specifically about meeting people and finding compatible partners, but that is a very fascinating thing. You mentioned
because there's a grocery store in Germany, I believe, called Aldi, and they have them here too, but where they have a checkout line that is especially for elderly customers who want to have a bit of a longer chat with someone, so that the person at the cash register is not having to rush them along. They can sort of have a bit of human interaction. So I think that's very much like the sort of thing that you're talking about.
That's fascinating. I think they should do that everywhere.
Well, they do it at Trader Joe's
or Express Lane.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Something that you mentioned there that I wanted to touch on again is the impact of getting married relatively early, maybe sticking with college partners, having children early. There's an immense value, I think, for me as somebody who has, I would say, pretty large aspirations. Like, I would love to grow the show. I'm a fitness coach, and that career isn't very specific. I'm not showing up at a certain time and leaving at a certain time, and I don't have a steady paycheck necessarily. There's a lot of legwork yet to be done in my career for me to feel comfortable enough to readily have a family. And that idea is, without a doubt, one of the largest motivating factors that I give myself every day of, hey man, you're getting married later this year. You've got to get this thing figured out, because if you don't, it's going to delay when you can start a family. Not that we like have a specific timeline on it, but I can't go into my 30s having not done anything substantial with my life and career, because there are people that are relying on me to do so. And that doesn't make me feel very good, to be honest with you, but it's sort of like a lights a fire under your butt kind of mentality where no matter what you do, you're going to be faced with challenges. And I would rather be doing something for this unified thing that I'm going to try to build, which is a family, than for some abstract thing that potentially doesn't mean much to me at all one day. I'm certain that my family will mean more to me than anything once I have it. And I think having it as like a North Star now is an immense privilege that not a lot of people really recognize they can have too.
Yeah, well, that's really commendable, Joel. I do think like wanting to be, earning and building something so that you can provide for your family is important. I know that surveys do show that women, even those who would call themselves liberal or progressive, do actually want to be married to someone who can provide for them and who will be there so there's I think stuff that shows how even sort of very educated women will not marry people who are below their status. So if they are a doctor at a hospital, they're not going to marry a nurse. They will marry another doctor or consultant or something like that. So I do think that even for those who would say that they're super progressive or anything like that, that actually they do still want to live within the sort of like stereotypical norms of a sort of provider dad. One of the things that there's quite a compelling argument there for some sort of financial subsidy for young people as they're starting out, and with families. So because you'll be in your sort of lower earning power, hopefully in your 20s, and you'll as you grow and experience opportunities, hopefully you will grow in your income. So recognizing the vulnerability of that, and that actually having a child is a massive interruption to sort of generating income. Some people talk about having a child tax credit, or an expanded child tax credit, so that there is a financial buffer for people in that just sort of disruptive time of having children when they're in their sort of like earlier income generating capacity. So that's an idea that some people are putting forward. Other people talk about paid family leave, which has sort of different sort of complexities. But just to help make sure that there is it's not so black and white, do or die, sink or swim around having a family, so that actually having a child shouldn't be a totally catastrophic event. As it is, I mean, someone shared with me this statistic, which just seems implausible, that in the United States, 1 in 4 women return to work just 2 weeks after giving birth, which is sort of almost physically impossible to imagine. I think that is people who are in pretty low income type, low skill work, so like fast food work, where I think you're not able to take any more than a 2-week break without losing your job. And so that's appalling, and that sort of would need to change. It's quite a lot needs to change for that to happen. So yeah, there's much that's relatively inhospitable about starting a family in this country, not least too, Joel, that in the United States, this is the second most expensive place in the world after Japan to have a baby. And yet at the same time, the United States has the highest maternal mortality rate in the world. So more mums die in the United States in the developed world than any other part of the developed world, even though it's so expensive to have a baby. So there's something kind of hostile or a bit weird, both in the health insurance, health market, and then the sort of provision of any sort of like stability financially here in this country. So there's a couple of things you're fighting against there, Joel, as you start out. But I think some sort of child tax credit would assist in that situation, especially as we want people to be able to start their own businesses, right, and get their own things off the ground, and that shouldn't be something that they have to do at the cost of starting a family.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack there. What are the kinds of people specifically that are getting married, though? I know we mentioned earlier higher income, but are there any other categories that we could point to?
Yeah, well, those who are making a success of marriage, so Brad Wilcox in this powerful book, Get Married, which I should sort of do a little promo for, available at all good bookstores. There are 4 masters of marriage that he describes there. Those who are sort of getting married and staying married. And he describes, and so there's actually a relative diversity of people who find their way to this institution of marriage and who manage to make it work for sort of like different factors. Some of the most successful stable marriages are Asian Americans, and I think that's anything from people from origin of India, so Indian Americans, not American Indians, Indian Americans, and sort of Korean, so any from Southeast Asia, they will, they have and that's partly because they take a sort of economic view about marriage and recognize the economic stability that is provided by taking a we before me approach to marriage. Now, some of the happiness satisfaction stats for Asian Americans are lower around marriage, happiness in marriage, than in others who are married. But Asian Americans who arrived in an institution where they are kind of like motivated by by that. Then we see the faithful, those who are religious, whether that's Muslim, Jewish, Christian, or Mormon. There is or any other sort of type of Christian type religion. There are there's huge staying power there. Church attendance seems to have, regular church attendance seems to have quite a big impact. And I think that goes to that thing about the norms and the networks that we were talking about earlier. Being surrounded by people who are trying to do the same thing as you, trying to do a stable family life, is a huge, because it's hard work, is a huge benefit. And then, which is one of the other reasons why the sort of decline in religious attendance is slightly problematic, because it's actually connected to a whole load of other things. People who go to church or whatever are more likely to volunteer, are more likely to be charitable donors too, which is sort of generally minded to sort of like more society minded. I think the other group who are doing really good at it are conservatives, those who vote conservative or Republican, conservative in their political views. They do well at marriage. And that I've only done 3 there, haven't I? I'm failing the test here on who the fourth
is
marriage is.
I think it's defined as a striver, just like the hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which I guess, Joel, you would fit into that. So someone who wants to do well, wants to sort of like work the system to their benefit, and really wants to try hard at making the most of making their life work for them and their family. And so, yeah, strivers, which I think is indicated in this book by people who go to college. Obviously, there's lots of people who are strivers who don't do a 4-year degree, but I think it's just one of the indicators that are used. So I think it's different groups of people motivated by different things who are arriving at marriage and finding it work and making it work. So I think some people argue it's only like a particular type of person that gets married, and that it just isn't the case. But yeah, what we are, and then that's what we are seeing.
I'm curious about this. I was giving this some thought as I was prepping for our conversation this morning, is that these, as you described, categories are very diverse. You have Asian Americans, you have people of faith, Christians, other religions of sorts. These strivers, I know we define it as college educated people. I think education in that regard is just a good indicator, right? Because it's people who, don't give up when something gets hard. They maybe take a couple extra steps to make sure that they're successful. And then conservatives is the fourth one. I guess when we start to have the conversation about, why you should get married, it can be very difficult, I think, to maybe convince people outside of those 4 categories. Like it's not just as simple as fall within one of those 4 categories and you'll see the benefits of getting married, right? Like, obviously, these are all things that, for the most part, you have very little control of, especially being Asian American, or, for the most part, your religious beliefs are bestowed upon you by the type of environment and family that you grew up in. Changing your political affiliation is very unlikely for the most part. And I think, as far as most people are concerned, this idea of continuing your own education, trying to challenge yourself, that's sort of an ingrained personality thing that no doubt you can develop. But, unfortunately, getting more people to get married isn't as simple as getting people to join one of these 4 categories, right? And so I guess my question is, where is the bridge between those that aren't getting married and those that are getting married, and how do we overcome that?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good question, and I think we and one that we often address and is addressed in this book. I don't know. I mean, the thing with stats is and these trends is it's important not to then fall into a trap of sort of a fatalism or the predetermined programs. So that, I mean, stats can work both ways. So actually, no, I think you could then actually say it is worth getting to a church if you've got a slight or mosque or synagogue or temple. If you've got just even the slightest interest in that sort of thing, try it out, give it a go. It may be helpful for you. And I don't quite know how that works about political affiliation. But I think something does need to happen, because what we are seeing is Brad describes quite well in the book Get Married, which is a great book. He says how I've got to do that, for doing this podcast. I have to keep doing that.
I'll make sure I link the book below.
Pay my bills. Bare branches. So the Chinese have an expression, bare branches, which are people who don't get married and don't have any children, as they don't bear fruit, as it were. And we, for the first time, this is like completely brand new, we have seen in this country that are now more people there are more adults in the United States who are single and without children than there are adults who are married and with children. And that's quite strange. That's quite new. And there's also huge declines in dating and other sorts of stuff too. So I think there are these big emerging trends. And then loneliness has been declared a public health issue by the Surgeon General. I think what's fascinating to me about that is that aspirations to marry remain high and across the board. Sort of 75, 80% of high schoolers want to get married. So, and I think it's really important when we talk about get married, that this isn't a sort of like government rollout program. This isn't a moral program of church people saying you should get married because it's the right thing to do. I think it is really important to make sure that people are able to fulfill their personal aspirations, and it's just asking, well, what is getting in the way of that? So if you're in lower income areas and some of the issue is it's difficult to find men who are able to provide, then some of what needs to be pushed is vocational training and other avenues for being able to get people into work. There's also a much greater role for the faith sector and the voluntary and the nonprofit sector to be able to sort of play a role. A lot when you're in neighborhoods that have a deterioration of sort of like neighborliness and relationships, being able to have like a family resource center in your neighborhood that can provide parenting training, relationship advice, having a greater voluntary nature around sort of childcare or daycare, where there are other opportunities to build relationship with other people who have a slightly different life experience to you. That's something that the voluntary sector can do and that churches can do really well. And that's partly because, again, those things are often relationships. They are relational. And as I was saying earlier, relationships are learned in the context of relationship. We're social animals. We learn how to relate to other people through relationships. And so being able to, some of the bridging things that you're talking about can be done by churches and nonprofits and outreach programs and other services. So I think that's like a really critical thing too. As we've mentioned, getting rid of marriage penalties, which was in 2017, marriage penalties were eradicated for the middle class, but they weren't eradicated for those who are on low income. So the things that we mentioned before. So I think getting those hurdles out of the way. And then I think on elite messaging, I think to hearing people, I don't know if you've watched, you're probably too young to watch the film The Devil Wears Prada with
I've seen The Devil Wears Prada.
Streep. Yeah, so there's that amazing scene where Meryl Streep is like dressing down and what's the name character? The plucky journalist in the terrible clothes, and they're talking about the sort of blue belt, and then sort of what's her name?
The actress?
Yeah, the actress. Yeah, not Meryl Streep. It's the same name as it's the same name as Shakespeare's wife. It's like really weird. I'd have to Google it. Anyway, so she chuckles about the blue, and then Meryl Streep dresses her down, saying how actually this choice of blue was a decision that was made here in this room, and then for a couple of like design shows where the cerulean blue was kind of like picked out and it like trickled down to your Kmart top that you're wearing now. And she talks about the sort of like trickle down of elite sort of messages that sort of like reach into society. And I think that's sort of like Hathaway. Is that
Hathaway.
right?
Yeah, that's
So,
right.
so I think in a similar way, this sort of like elite messages around anything goes and polyamory and marriage is a waste of time, having kids is a waste of time. Just discover yourself through as much sort of like chaos as you can possibly find. Those sorts of like messages are, what Rob Henderson in his book calls luxury beliefs, but that, you have plenty of other assets relationally and financially, in terms of education and career to protect you from those like mad choices. But those are messages that are like trickle down. Or even those people who are saying, different forms of family are just as good as others. They say that publicly, but privately, that 77% of people who are on higher incomes are actually living stable, married, family lives because they prefer it. So I think some of what needs to be addressed is that elite hypocrisy. The sort of like pretending to care about those who aren't able to meet their aspirations, whilst privately like enjoying the social and financial benefits of being emotional, mental health, physical health benefits of being married themselves. And so I think so there needs to be a greater honesty, I think, in the elite messaging with the sort of Meryl Streep type characters, as it were, in their New York rooms, setting out their, platforms to be more honest about what the stats show, that actually those people who are married are the happiest. They live, they have a financial boost. There's a health boost. There are even some studies to suggest there's a longevity boost. People live a bit longer if they're married. And that suicide and deaths of despair that are on the increase are overrepresented among young men who are not getting married. It's the complete opposite of what Pearl Davis and Andrew Tate are saying. So this is a manifestation of this trickle-down elite messaging. So I think that it is important to address that elite messaging too, because I think just to harp on about it just a tiny bit more, if you are in that context where you're kind of like looking to the left, looking to the right, just figuring out, hang on, how do people do this marriage thing? I've not seen it. And then you're listening to you're watching a movie on Netflix, or you're listening to some song that's coming in over your earphones, or you're listening to an Andrew Tate, TikTok thing. These messages on, if the messages are like, I'm going to find my soulmate, you're watching Love Island or whatever it is. I'm going to find my soulmate who's going to fulfill me. These are not helpful messages for how to build a successful relationship. So it's a relatively long-winded way of getting around to answering the question of how you might, I guess, go about building. What do you think, though, Joel? How would you go about doing it?
Well, I think that you're onto something with the importance of the communal side of being a human being. I can't even point to somebody who I learned this from. I feel like I talk to people in many different capacities on the show about the idea that in the last 50 to 100 years, the shift to the individualized thinking that is me first is causing lots of problems in our society. Probably the most pertinent issues like the mental health thing. It's people who have a community and give themselves to an idea often feel better than people who don't. And it seems like it's the same thing. So I guess to touch on those four things again, the Asian Americans, obviously culturally, they value this idea of family, living as a cohesive unit, sharing responsibility of children. Marriage is a lifelong thing that you have to kind of work at and develop. And so because this is their baseline, they reap the rewards of having that community because it's ingrained in who they are. I would say, obviously, religious people are very similar, probably think very similarly. This is a union between you and a spouse and God, and it's something that you need to uphold for eternity, and you're giving yourself to this thing, and maybe you take on a little bit more traditional masculine and feminine roles in those environments, which, again, to use your point, maybe isn't better or worse or up to modern aspirations of most people, but I think most people could agree that it obviously works in terms of lasting marriage because, the data shows that. Conservatives and then the strivers, I think it would be the same thing. it's easier for these groups to fall within community-based things. I don't think it would be wrong of me to say that most conservatives are also have some sort of religious affiliation. I bet there's a bit of a crossover there. But what makes my brain go off, it kind of sets the light bulb, is, again, I work as a fitness coach. I work in a CrossFit gym, and CrossFit as a methodology, as a business, is very well known for its community building aspect. Like, that's one of the reasons why people are successful with it. It's because it's just one of the thousands of exercise methodologies, and one of the reasons why people are consistent with it, with CrossFit, as opposed to other means of exercise, is because you work out with other people, and there's a bit of camaraderie that is developed with, you're doing this hard thing together. And to be quite honest with you, like, I met my fiance in college, and if I didn't, I probably would have met whoever I found at a gym, because that's where I spent the majority of my time, right? And so I do think that there is a bit of a contemporary viewpoint on top of all the stuff we mentioned earlier that goes something like, why would I have this relationship with you if you're not benefiting me? Which I think is kind of backwards. Like, where did that come from? Because the way that I've always just naturally interpreted it, and I think that this is in line with the idea of wanting to get married, is that once you are with somebody, that union becomes, okay, it's like we first, and then we can focus on each other. And obviously there's a ton that goes into that, right? Like, you need to be well as an individual, and there's personal responsibility and priorities that need to be met. But I think, speaking broadly, anything that we can do to educate people on the fact that it's not always going to be easy, this isn't always about you, is going to be helpful in ensuring that people feel like marriage is a worthwhile pursuit. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but that's kind of, while you were speaking, that's where my brain was going.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I mean, it is important going into marriage. I mean, you are, Brad talks about the we before me. I mean, the me still exists in the we before me. So I definitely don't think it's like a subjugation of me to sort of marriage. And I'm sorry if you're getting that whistling noise. It's the barista that in our office.
No problem. I wouldn't want to interfere with anybody's coffee.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I think that's important. I mean, I think some of what you're touching on, though, is, and this is where social media is unhelpful, and there are, I think, other factors that are driving it, is the rise in narcissism in the United States, which correlates with a decline in empathy. So empathy, the ability to be able to think about what someone else is feeling. And so, I mean, these things go together. I mean, the rise of narcissism comes with a collapse in empathy. I think there are possible reasons for why there is a rise in narcissism, controversial views perhaps related to attachment and what happens in the first 3 years of life. But I think that, but obviously social media doesn't help, because social media absolutely rewards narcissism.
Yeah, I spoke to, his name is Phil Reed. He is a professor at the University of Swansea in Wales. And we talked about that idea. Compulsive social media use, social media addiction are both associated with increases in narcissism. And it's a bit cyclical like that. I'm sure you're familiar, where people that have narcissistic tendencies are more easily, will become more easily addictive or fall into compulsive social media behavior, but also people that fall into addictive or compulsive social media behavior will begin to display higher levels of narcissistic tendencies. So, I just learned that recently, and it's fascinating that you bring that up.
Yeah, I think it definitely contributes to sort of a failure to be able to relate. And I'm sure is a contributing factor to sort of the me before we approach that might be sort of putting people off from getting married, as well as in perhaps unrealistic views about what marriage is like, if life is formed by the perfection of what you're seeing on social media. But yeah, I definitely think it's interesting that Florida have just, I think, banned social media use for those under the age of 16, because I think to go off piste here, I think I was on the plane the other day. I'm in Salt Lake City, and I was really amazed. I haven't been on the plane for a while and a couple of years, and I was amazed how like everyone was literally glued to their phones as soon as they got in on their seats. Like I felt like I literally was the odd one out. I was the only one that didn't get my phone out. I was like looking around at what other people were doing and looking to see what the movies that were on offer were going to be. But everyone, they don't need to bother with the movies on the screens anymore because people are just like totally on their phones. And it made me think of, those weird old movies where you see people smoking cigarettes on a plane. And everyone was just like smoking. And it must have been so weird in the 1940s just to be around cigarette smoke the whole time wherever you went. At the dinner table, people are like smoking a cigarette. On the plane, they're smoking. At a restaurant, they're smoking. And I think, I don't know how my phone is making a noise because I've literally turned it off. I literally powered it down because airplane mode wasn't doing anything. So, but I think social media is actually, we will look back on it, these early days of social media, I'm sure, and say in terms of its addictive quality, it was as damaging as sort of like the ubiquitous cigarette, especially for adolescent brains.
I was pumping gas the other day at Costco, and I was noticing, I was looking around and everybody was on their phone while they were pumping their gas. And I was like, I'm going to put my phone in my truck. So I did. I put it in and I was just standing there kind of like hands in my pocket, looking around. Like, I haven't done this in a while. And I thought to myself that it's just pretty bad that even just standing here, like I obviously had control over the fact that I put my phone in my truck, but I was like, I can't remember the last time I just like sat someplace and didn't pull my phone out immediately just to fill the time with something else. And I think that time of boredom or emptiness is so valuable. And I don't really think, to your point, that people are realizing how much filling that time is affecting them.
Yeah, I think, it will become evident, I'm sure. But I think in the same way that we're like a gas that we used to have lead in our paint or lead in our water pipes, on the same way that, people were sort of pretending that tobacco wasn't carcinogenic for a long time. I'm sure that there will be a greater level of honesty around the addictive nature of social media, and in particular, on developing brains. Anyway, that's definitely off piece, and it's not in the powerful book that Brad Wilcox has written that's called Get Married, which does take a look at some of the social trends that have taken place in the last couple of decades, and with some pointers on what you can do about it.
I'm curious about this as an idea, and this might be a little bit off topic. It's about children, so kind of relevant. And perhaps this is very in line with what we were just describing, which is narcissistic tendencies. But I'll tell you a story quickly. I was at the gym the other day and I was coaching a group fitness class. And there was a lady in the class who I was like, hey, how's your morning? And she was like, let me tell you about my morning. And she was like, these pants that I'm wearing are brand new because I got up. And she described a bunch of stuff that happened with her and her kids. They were misbehaving and it was really challenging. And then as soon as she got in the car, she spilled pretty much her entire cup of coffee on her pants. And so then on the way to the gym, she stopped at the store to get a new pair of pants to work out in, right? And, I can't remember exactly what I said specifically, but it was something along the lines of, today is what you make it. I'm sorry that happened to you. Like, hopefully we can, have a better day moving forward. Something positive. And then the lady that was overhearing the conversation next to her was in her 50s. She's got 4 kids. She looked at me and sort of jokingly was like, you sound like somebody who doesn't have kids. And all of those things are true. And granted, maybe I don't know what it's like to have kids, but I've always been of the mind that I hope I never turn into the kind of parent that speaks about their children in that way, because it's always been off-putting to me. It's like, number one, I was telling this lady, I hope she has a better day. And I was like trying to be positive, but also like, you chose to have your kids, and to use them, I think, as almost a scapegoat for your negative feelings or whatever the case may be, seems like a silly thing. And I know that might have been a very small, perhaps insignificant moment, but that happened a couple of weeks ago, and I knew we were going to be having, or a couple of days ago, and I knew we were going to be having this conversation, and I wanted to ask you about it. But I feel like there's got to be some connection here. Maybe it's this narcissistic tendency. Maybe it's this degradation of how we view marriage. But is there some sort of connection that maybe you've seen as it relates to almost like, why do people complain about their children so much?
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, so the larger, these are great questions, Joel, and I think the larger, so the headline here is, I think that the people that, like, as I mentioned, the people who are happiest in America are those who are married and those who are children, and those percentages, the share of people who report higher levels of happiness, that even goes up when they're also attending church. So they're either lying or in these general social surveys, or is accurate. And so I think so the headline feature is that the happiest people in America are those who are married and those who have children, which is sort of surprising in some respects, because you would think it would be, more fun to be flying off to Rome to take a sort of photo in golden hour and then sort of, be back in time in New York for dinner or whatever. But anyway, it turns out that isn't as quite as fulfilling as being married and having kids. I don't know if it's, I mean, obviously, and I think having children is difficult, and I would say it's definitely harder than I had anticipated. So we have a gorgeous 4-year-old, and I actually think that what is happening is a little bit of what I was describing earlier about the shrinking of general relationships and networks. So I think, I guess in previous generations, it was more possible to have a parent who was staying at home, typically the mom. And then, if you have, the dad's going off earning some money, and then people are able to afford life on one income. Women are there, usually the mother is at home, and those mothers are sort of building community amongst themselves on the street or in their neighborhood. But with the rise of female participation in the labor force, and fewer stay-at-home mums, and surveys show that actually the ideal arrangement that most mums report is that they want to be able to raise their children, have their income supplemented by a part-time job. And if they can't raise their children, this is especially true for Hispanics, that they want to be able to have their extended family involved in the raising of their children. So I think that there is this sort of, Hillary Clinton wrote this book ages ago called "It Takes a Village." I think something like that, to raise a child. I think that whatever she was writing about, it seems to have been co-opted, especially by the left, to this idea that you can literally send your child to a village to be raised. It doesn't, you can just send them to a village of people at a daycare center, and they can look after them for 40 hours a week, and then mum, dad can go off or whatever to work. But that is completely not what is meant by "it takes a village." It takes a village to support parents who are being parents. The parents need a village, and that can be extended family, whether that's siblings or parents, but it also can be church folk, pastors, and friendly neighbors. Just you need a whole ton of people to support. So I think the fact that we've seen those shriveling up of wider relationships, I think 25%, I think some research says 25% of people are estranged from their families, largely through choice. Then some people are obviously geographically removed from their parents by thousands of miles. And I think there's just a decline in the village that supports parents. So that actually parents have a lot less to draw on emotionally, socially, than perhaps was available to them in the past. So if there is a rise of crankiness amongst parents, I think it is the fact that they perhaps have less resources to draw on an ongoing nature than perhaps the previous generation or two had. So that might be a factor.
Yeah. Okay, I see. I think, speaking broadly, this obviously is a very nuanced, multifaceted thing that we're talking about, but it's nice to hear that it seems like it's coming back around to this idea that staying highly involved with a community of some kind, be it your church or a gym or even just like a group of friends that you went through school with, seems to be like a reasonable way to, for the most, kind of what I mentioned earlier when you were asking me questions about the show, staying highly, sorry, let me just take a step back. having a community of people to be around with will get you 80% of the way there. There's other nuanced things that you need to do, but for the most part, having a community or a village that you can rely on to help both you and your partner and your family sustain all of the things necessary is very worthwhile to maintain and pursue.
Yeah, exactly, Joel. And I mean, I think your example there of CrossFit is completely spot on. So I think, it requires, you can have, it requires intrinsic self-motivation, like primarily. But I think having the, other people aren't going to do it for you, but being around like-minded people with pursuing similar goals and to sort of like be able to encourage you on a down day or whatever, I think that's like really critical. And so this is exactly what we're getting at, that when it comes to getting married in the first place, staying married, becoming a parent, and then the different ages and stages of parenthood. I think having other people who've been there and done that, who are in the same boat as you, I think all of that is like really important. That's why, for some, like church can be helpful because you've got, grandparents around as well as like people who are the same age as you. And then you've also got like single people around who can, help out with babysitting or, just again, sort of just to have a relationship with. So I think all of those things are like really, really critical. So yeah, I think that's spot on, Joel.
As we kind of wrap up here, the last thing that I want to ask that I'm curious about is, you mentioned earlier the statistics of now for the first time, there's more unmarried people without children than there are married people with children. What is the unintended consequence or long-term outcome of a society like that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's actually, I don't think it's just people who aren't married. I think it's people who aren't in a relationship at all, who are single and without children. That's on the increase. And it has huge implications, especially for elder care and even like immediately now. I mean, I think the number of people who are in retirement who live by themselves is, and have also perhaps never been married, that is hugely on the up. So I think, I know we're seeing a collapse in social security because there aren't people who are around to pay into it. There are all sorts of disturbing trends around what it might mean. This is like decline in the fertility rate. Is why some people are arguing that it's important to have sort of like open borders to sort of like repopulate, the country. But I am not the demographic expert, so I'm not entirely sure. But I think we are seeing a lonelier country, and I think there are going to be increasingly a lot of lonelier older people. So I think that's what we can look forward to if trends like that continue.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time today. I would like, maybe you want to end on a more positive note. Is there anything else that you think is worth adding to this conversation?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, there's tons of people, the majority of people want to get married. They want to find, a life partner and get married to them and enjoy a stable, happy married, family life. I mean, and that's attainable. It's doable. So I think Brad would often encourage, he's a professor, so he's around, people a bit younger than you all the time. And I think his encouragement to them is, yeah, you've got a plan for your career. You've got a plan for where you want to live and where you want to study. Do you have a plan for dating? Just get dating. Ask someone out. Put your phone down and try and meet someone in real life and see how it goes. And I think his encouragement to girls is don't be too picky. Go on the second date, and give it a go. But yeah, I think the main reminder is that the happiest, healthiest, most financially secure people in America today are married, and there's no reason why you as a viewer can't join them. So that's exciting, isn't it?
I will make sure to add the book in the description below for those that are interested in checking it out. But is there anywhere else that you would recommend people check out information if they're curious about marriage and the like?
Yeah, well, we have a lot of people that come to our blog at ifstudies.org, Institute for Family Studies website. And there are millions of people that come across our website by Google who are looking for relationship advice and looking for just pretty simple social science and evidence that shows what works. I think there's a lot of voices out there that are preachy, whether it's Andrew Tate or whether it's a different form, actual preaching. And so we try to present work that's just evidence-based, and this is what is happening statistically, and this is what you can learn from what's happening here. So yeah, ifstudies.org.
Awesome. I'll be sure to also put that in the show notes below too, for anybody interested in checking it out. But again, thank you so much for your time. We'll leave it right there. I think this was an excellent episode, and I learned a whole lot from you. So thank you for your time.
Great. Cheers, Joel. Real pleasure to meet you, and good luck with all your aspirations and goals.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this week's episode of Good People. Make sure you check the description for Brad Wilcox's book, Get Married, and all of the information that Chris provided at the end of the episode. If you guys are watching on YouTube, before you head out, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our weekly uploads. If while you were listening, you thought of someone who would enjoy this episode, send them the link. That really helps us grow this thing, and we appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.